using his job at a logistics company to gather intelligence about illegal activities. He documented meetings with federal agents, surveillance operations, and his growing concern that his cover had been blown. They read an entry from 3 weeks before his death. "I'm being followed, and my phone has been hacked. I've set up contingency plans in case they try to silence me. If I don't survive this, I want Sarah and my family to know the truth about what I was doing and why it was important." Detective Collins photographed every page of the journal while Sarah tried to process this revelation about the man she thought she knew completely. Jake had been protecting people, risking his life to help stop criminals who preyed on vulnerable individuals. But he'd also been lying to her, living a secret life that had ultimately led to his death. The final entry in the journal was dated the morning of Jake's death. "They're going to try to kill me tonight. I can feel it. I've arranged for everything important to be revealed after my death, using automated systems that will continue to function even if I'm not here to operate them. I've also set up a way to communicate from beyond, using technology that most people won't understand. If this works, I'll be able to guide the investigation and protect the people I love." Sarah looked at Detective Collins, who was reading over her shoulder. "The digital afterlife services he was researching," she said quietly. "He wasn't just planning to schedule posts about missing friends and family. He was creating a system to continue his undercover work after his death." Collins nodded grimly. "But even the most advanced AI system couldn't predict specific future events or access real-time information. There has to be something else going on here." As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone chimed with a new Facebook notification. Jake had posted again, "You found the journal. Good. Now you understand why I had to keep secrets from you, Sarah. I was trying to protect you from the danger I was in. But my death wasn't the end of the story. Agent Santos is waiting for you at the coffee shop on 5th Street. She'll explain everything." Sarah showed the post to Collins, who immediately began making phone calls to verify the existence of Agent Maria Santos and her connection to Jake's case. Within minutes, he'd confirmed that Santos was indeed a federal agent working on a human trafficking investigation, and that Jake Morrison had been a confidential informant in the case. "She's agreed to meet with us," Collins said, hanging up his phone. "This is bigger than we thought. Jake's death wasn't just a murder, it was an attempt to silence a witness who was helping to expose a criminal organization." As they prepared to leave the apartment, Sarah took one last look around the space where Jake had lived and worked in secret. She understood now why he'd been so secretive in his final weeks, why he'd been making arrangements and preparing for the worst. He'd been a hero, risking everything to help people he'd never met. But the mystery of his continued digital presence remained unsolved. Even with advanced planning and sophisticated technology, Jake's posts contained information that no pre-programmed system could have known. The live stream from the cemetery had shown objects that didn't exist in the physical world but held personal meaning for his friends and family. The phone calls at 3:17 a.m. suggested a level of real-time interaction that defied all logical explanation. As Sarah locked the apartment door behind them, she whispered a quiet thank you to Jake, wherever he was. Whether his continued presence was the result of advanced technology, supernatural intervention, or something else entirely, she was grateful for the truth he'd helped them uncover. The meeting with Agent Santos would reveal the full scope of Jake's undercover work in the criminal organization he died trying to expose. But for Sarah, the most important revelation was that Jake had died as he'd lived, protecting others and fighting for justice, even when it meant sacrificing his own safety and happiness. The Facebook posts would continue for several more months, gradually tapering off as the criminal investigation reached its conclusion. Jake's digital presence would help solve not only his own murder but also the larger case he'd been working on. And though Sarah would never fully understand how Jake had managed to communicate from beyond death, she would carry with her the knowledge that love and dedication to justice could transcend even the boundaries between life and death. In the end, Jake Morrison's last post would be a simple message of love and farewell. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for finding the truth. Live fully, love deeply, and remember that some connections are stronger than death itself. Until we meet again." The account would go silent after that, but Sarah would always wonder if Jake was still watching over them, protecting them from whatever dangers remained in the digital shadows where the living and the dead could somehow still touch. The blue notification light blinked like a heartbeat in the darkness, cutting through Sarah Chen's restless sleep with the persistence of a memory that refused to fade. 3:47 in the morning, and her phone was buzzing with the impossible, a Facebook message from Jake Morrison, the man she'd buried 4 months ago beneath the ancient oak tree at Riverside Memorial Cemetery. Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for the device on her nightstand, the same nightstand where Jake used to leave his wallet and keys each night when he'd stay over at her apartment. The familiar weight of grief settled in her chest like stones, but this time it was mixed with something else, a cold, creeping fear that made her skin prickle with goosebumps despite the warm June air drifting through her open window. The notification read simply, "Jake Morrison has posted a new status update." Jake Morrison, who had died when his Harley-Davidson collided with a delivery truck on Highway 15 during the worst thunderstorm the county had seen in 30 years. Jake Morrison, whose body she'd identified at the county morgue by the scar on his left hand from a childhood accident with his father's workshop tools. Jake Morrison, whose phone had been found scattered in pieces across 50 yards of rain-soaked asphalt, destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. With hands that shook like autumn leaves, Sarah opened the Facebook app and navigated to Jake's profile. The post was there, posted just minutes ago, glowing on her screen with an otherworldly blue light that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. "Can't sleep tonight," the post read. "Thinking about everyone I left behind. Sarah, I know you're reading this right now. You always check your phone when you can't sleep, especially when you're wearing that old concert t-shirt from the show we went to last summer. The one with the small hole near the left shoulder that you keep saying you'll throw away but never do." Sarah's breath caught in her throat like a trapped bird. She looked down at herself, at the faded band t-shirt she'd unconsciously pulled on before bed, the same shirt Jake had mentioned. The hole near the shoulder had been there for months, a tiny imperfection that Jake used to trace with his finger while they watched movies on lazy Sunday afternoons. It was such a small, intimate detail that no one else would have known or cared about. The post continued, "I miss the way you hum that song while you make coffee in the morning. You probably don't even know you do it, but it always made me smile. You're humming it right now, aren't you?" And she was. Without realizing it, Sarah had been softly humming the melody to Blue Moon, the jazz standard that had been playing in the coffee shop where she and Jake had their first date 2 years ago. It had become their song, something she'd catch herself humming during quiet moments, especially when she missed him most. The comments on the post were already flooding in from Jake's friends and family, a mixture of confusion, fear, and desperate hope. His younger sister Emma had written, "This isn't funny. Whoever is doing this, please stop. Our family is trying to heal." His best friend Marcus had posted a string of question marks followed by Jake. "Is this really you? How is this possible?" But it was the comment from Jake's mother, Linda Morrison, that made Sarah's heart break all over again. "My sweet boy, if this is really you, please tell me you're not in pain. Please tell me you found peace." Sarah scrolled through Jake's timeline with growing unease, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in the silence of her apartment. The posts dated back to just 2 weeks after his funeral, starting with simple, innocuous messages that could have been scheduled in advance. Jake had always been incredibly organized, the type of person who planned everything down to the smallest detail. He'd had life insurance policies arranged before his 28th birthday, a will drafted and notarized, and detailed instructions for his funeral that had made the terrible process slightly easier for his family. In those early posts, he'd written about missing his friends, about hoping they would take care of each other, about being grateful for the love they'd shared. They were the kind of messages that a tech-savvy person might schedule to post after their death, a final gift to ease the grief of those left behind. Sarah had initially found them comforting, even beautiful in their own way. But as weeks passed, the posts had become more specific, more immediate, more impossible. 6 weeks after his death, Jake had posted about current events, political developments that hadn't occurred when he was alive, sports scores from games that hadn't been played, celebrity news that broke weeks after his funeral. He'd commented on a controversial Supreme Court decision with the kind of insightful analysis that had always made Sarah fall in love with his mind. He'd congratulated his former coworker on a promotion that had only been announced the day before the post appeared. 2 months after his death, Jake had begun commenting on his own funeral with an intimacy that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Beautiful service yesterday," he'd written. "Thank you all for coming. The flowers were incredible, Mom. Those white lilies you chose were perfect. They were always my favorite, ever since I was a kid and helped you plant them in the backyard garden. Sarah, that eulogy you gave made me cry, which is weird because I'm pretty sure I don't have tear ducts anymore." Sarah remembered that funeral with crystal clarity. Every moment burned into her memory like a photograph she couldn't lose. She'd stood at the podium in the small chapel, looking out at the sea of faces, friends, family, coworkers, and fellow motorcyclists who'd come to pay their respects to a man who'd lived life with an intensity that had drawn people to him like moths to a flame. Her voice had shaken as she talked about Jake's adventurous spirit, his infectious laugh, his way of making everyone around him feel more alive. She'd mentioned the white lilies during her speech, how Jake had helped his mother plant them when he was 12 years old, how they'd bloomed every spring since then like a promise that beautiful things could grow from the darkest soil. But she'd never posted about the funeral online, never mentioned the specific flowers or the story behind them. How could Jake have known? The posts had grown more personal, more disturbing from there. 3 months after his death, Jake had begun commenting on Sarah's private life with an accuracy that made her feel exposed and vulnerable. He'd posted supportive messages when she'd finally worked up the courage to go on a date with David Chen, a kind veterinarian who'd been asking her out for months before Jake's death. "I'm glad you're trying to live again," Jake had written. "David seems like a good man. He makes you laugh the way you used to laugh with me, and that sound is the most beautiful music in the world. Don't feel guilty about being happy, Sarah. I want nothing more than for you to be happy." Sarah had never told anyone about David. They'd gone to a small restaurant across town, somewhere none of Jake's friends would see them. It had been their second date when she'd finally relaxed enough to laugh, really laugh, at something David had said about his practice. The sound had surprised her, as if she'd forgotten she was capable of joy. But Jake couldn't have known about the dates, couldn't have known about her laughter, couldn't have known anything at all. The phone calls had started a week after that post. Sarah's ringtone would pierce the silence of her apartment at exactly 3:47 a.m., the precise time of Jake's accident according to the police report. When she'd answer, Jake's name bright on her caller ID, she'd hear nothing but static and what might have been breathing. Sometimes, buried in the white noise, she'd swear she could hear his voice saying her name. "Sarah. Sarah, can you hear me?" The calls had terrified her, but she'd found herself answering them anyway, desperate for any connection to the man she'd loved. She tried recording them, but the audio files always came out empty, containing nothing but silence. She blocked the number, but the calls continued from different numbers. Always at 3:47 a.m. Always Jake's name on the display. Always that same static-filled emptiness that somehow felt full of longing. Linda Morrison had called Sarah in tears after receiving similar calls. "I know it sounds crazy," she'd sobbed into the phone, her voice raw with grief and confusion. "But I swear I heard him say Mom yesterday. Just once, very faint, like he was calling from somewhere very far away. But it was his voice, Sarah. I carried him for 9 months. I heard his first word, his first sentence, every sound he ever made. I know my son's voice." Sarah had driven to Linda's house that same night, finding Jake's mother sitting at her kitchen table surrounded by printouts of his Facebook posts. Linda had been highlighting passages, making notes in the margins, trying to find some pattern or explanation that would make sense of the impossible. "Look at this one," Linda had said, pointing to a post from the previous week. "He's talking about his father's watch, the one Robert lost in the lake when Jake was 15. But Jake says he found it, says it's waiting for Robert in the old tackle box in the garage. I checked, Sarah. The watch is there. It's been there all along, but Robert never looked in that particular box because he thought it was empty. Sarah had stared at the post, then at Linda's tear-stained face, then back at the post. Jake's father, Robert, had died 3 years ago from cancer, but not before spending countless hours searching for his grandfather's watch, a family heirloom that had been passed down through 4 generations. He'd lost it during a fishing trip with Jake, and the loss had haunted him until his death. If the watch was really in the tackle box, how had Jake known? And why hadn't he said anything when his father was alive? There's more, Linda had continued, her voice barely above a whisper. He posted about Emma's pregnancy last week. But Emma only told me yesterday, and she hasn't announced it to anyone else yet. She's not even 10 weeks along. How could Jake have known? Emma Morrison, Jake's 25-year-old sister, had indeed confided her pregnancy to their mother just the day before. She'd been planning to wait until her second trimester to tell the rest of the family, nervous about announcing too early after having a miscarriage the previous year. But somehow, Jake had known. His post had been gentle and supportive. Congratulations, them. A baby boy. Jake would be so proud to be an uncle. Don't worry so much about everything. You're going to be an amazing mother. Emma hadn't even known the baby's gender yet. Her first ultrasound wasn't scheduled for another 2 weeks. Detective Ray Collins had been assigned to investigate what the department initially classified as digital harassment of grieving families. A 23-year veteran of the police force, Collins had seen his share of cruel pranks and sick individuals who preyed on people in their most vulnerable moments. But this case had troubled him from the beginning in ways he couldn't articulate to his captain or his partner. The thing is, Collins had explained to Sarah during their first meeting at the station, whoever is doing this has access to information that goes beyond what any normal person could obtain. They know intimate details about conversations that happened in private, personal moments that weren't recorded or documented anywhere. They seem to have real-time access to events as they happen. Sarah had brought copies of all the posts, organized chronologically in a thick binder that had become her obsession. Collins spread them across his desk like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve, his weathered face creased with concern and confusion. "Look at this one from last week," he said, pointing to a post that had appeared just 3 days earlier. "Jake is commenting on your sister's decision to change her major at college. But according to your sister, she only made that decision yesterday morning and hasn't told anyone except her advisor." Sarah's younger sister Michelle attended State University 3 hours away, studying pre-med despite having serious doubts about whether medicine was the right path for her. Michelle had called Sarah just yesterday, crying about feeling overwhelmed and uncertain about her future. They talked for 2 hours about Michelle's passion for environmental science and her fear of disappointing their parents, who'd always dreamed of having a doctor in the family. Jake's post had addressed Michelle directly. "Follow your heart, not other people's expectations. Environmental science needs passionate people like you. The planet needs advocates who understand that healing the earth is just as important as healing people. Your parents will be proud of you no matter what you choose." Michelle had never met Jake. Sarah had started dating him after Michelle left for college, and their relationship had been conducted mostly through Sarah's stories and occasional video calls. Jake couldn't have known about Michelle's academic struggles or her passion for environmental issues. He couldn't have known anything about her at all. "We've traced the IP addresses of the posts," Collins continued, pulling out a folder filled with technical documentation. "They're coming from all over the city, the public library, coffee shops, the hospital where Jake was pronounced dead, even from inside this police station. But here's what's really strange, the security cameras at these locations don't show anyone using computers or accessing the internet at the times the posts were made." The detective showed Sarah a series of screenshots from security footage. In each image, the location where the post had supposedly originated was empty. A computer terminal at the library sat unused, its screen dark. A table at Starbucks showed no laptop or phone in sight. The hospital's computer lab was deserted except for the night shift nurse who was in a different part of the building entirely. "We've also discovered something else that doesn't make sense," Collins said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Jake's phone number has been reactivated. Someone has been using it to create new social media accounts, to make the calls you and his mother have been receiving. The phone company insists the number was permanently disconnected after his death, but their own records show it as active. Sarah's mind flashed back to the weeks after Jake's funeral, when she'd been paying for his phone service because she couldn't bear to cancel it. She'd call the number late at night when the grief became unbearable, just to hear his voicemail message one more time. His voice, recorded when he was alive and vibrant and full of plans for the future, would tell her he was probably off on some adventure and would call her back soon. The message had been a lifeline, a way to hear his voice and pretend, for just a moment, that he might actually call her back. She'd finally canceled the service 2 months ago, recognizing that holding onto it was preventing her from healing. The customer service representative had been kind and understanding, assuring her that the line would be permanently deactivated within 24 hours. But just days later, the mysterious calls had started. The phone company has no record of who reactivated the service or how the request was authorized, Collins explained. The account is being billed to an address that doesn't exist, 1247 Elm Street, which would put it in the middle of River Park. There's number 1247 Elm Street. Sarah had driven past River Park countless times. It was a beautiful space with walking trails, a duck pond, and a playground where she and Jake had sometimes gone to feed the ducks on Sunday afternoons. The idea that his phone service was somehow connected to that peaceful place felt both comforting and deeply unsettling. Detective Collins, Sarah said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you think Jake is somehow still alive? Is there any possibility that the accident was staged or that he survived? Collins had clearly been expecting this question. He pulled out another folder, this one containing the official accident report, photographs from the scene, and the coroner's findings. I've reviewed everything multiple times, he said gently. The accident was real. Jake died on impact from multiple traumatic injuries. His body was positively identified by you, his mother, and his dental records. There's no doubt that Jake Morrison is deceased. The photographs were difficult to look at, but Sarah forced herself to examine them. Jake's motorcycle, mangled beyond recognition. The delivery truck, its front end crumpled from the impact. Debris scattered across the rain-soaked highway. And Jake himself, covered by a white sheet, lying beside the wreckage of his beloved Harley. But that doesn't mean there isn't something unusual happening here, Collins continued. I've been a cop for over 2 decades, and I've learned that the world is full of things that can't be easily explained. What I can tell you is that someone, or something, has been using Jake's identity to communicate with his loved ones. Whether it's an elaborate hoax, some kind of advanced technology, or something else entirely, I'm going to find out. The detective's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. He answered with his usual gruff Collins, but his expression quickly changed from professional efficiency to genuine alarm. Sarah watched as his face paled, his grip tightening on the phone. We'll be right there, he said, ending the call and reaching for his jacket. There's been another development. Jake's Facebook account is currently live streaming from inside his apartment, which has been sealed and empty since his death. The apartment building on Maple Street was a converted Victorian house painted pale yellow with white trim, divided into 4 units that attracted young professionals who couldn't quite afford houses of their own yet. Jake had lived on the 2nd floor for 3 years, in a space that perfectly captured his personality, meticulously organized but comfortable, filled with books about adventure travel and framed photographs from his motorcycle trips across the country. Sarah had her own key to the apartment, a privilege Jake had granted her 6 months into their relationship when she'd started staying over on weekends. She'd used it countless times to water his plants when he was away on weekend camping trips, to surprise him with home-cooked meals, to curl up on his couch and wait for him to come home from work. Now the key felt heavy in her hand, weighted with memories and the terrible knowledge that Jake would never come home again. Detective Collins examined the building's exterior while Sarah stood on the sidewalk, looking up at Jake's 2nd floor windows. The apartment had been sealed by the police and the landlord after Jake's death, part of the standard procedure when someone dies without a will or clear instructions about their belongings. Jake's family had been planning to clear out his possessions, but the ongoing investigation had put those plans on hold. According to the building manager, No one has been inside that apartment since we sealed it 6 weeks ago, Collins said, rejoining Sarah on the sidewalk. The locks haven't been changed, there's been no maintenance work scheduled, and the landlord swears he hasn't given anyone permission to enter. Other police officers had already arrived, along with a small crowd of neighbors and curious onlookers who'd been drawn by the unusual activity. Sarah recognized some of Jake's neighbors, Mrs. Patterson from the first floor, who'd always complained about his motorcycle but had baked him cookies every Christmas, Tim from the apartment next door, who'd borrowed Jake's tools and never quite gotten around to returning them. The live stream started about an hour ago, Collins explained as they approached the building's front entrance. It's being broadcast from Jake's Facebook account, and it currently has over 2,000 viewers. People are watching from all over the world. Sarah pulled out her phone and navigated to Jake's Facebook page. The live stream was indeed active, showing a view of his apartment from what appeared to be the center of the living room. The image was clear and steady, as if being filmed by a professional camera operator, but there was no camera visible in the frame. The apartment looked exactly as Sarah remembered it, but there was something unsettling about seeing it this way. Jake's leather jacket hung on the back of a chair, exactly where he'd left it the morning of his death. His coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter, still stained with the remnants of his final cup. Books were stacked neatly on the coffee table, including the travel guide to Iceland he'd been reading in preparation for a trip they'd been planning for the following spring. But what made Sarah's blood run cold was the audio from the live stream. Jake's voice, clear and unmistakable, was providing commentary on the scene. "I know this is hard to understand," he was saying, his tone warm and conversational, the same tone he'd used when explaining complicated concepts to her or telling stories about his day. "I never wanted to scare anyone or cause pain. But I needed to find a way to let you know that I'm still here, still watching over all of you." The comments on the live stream were flooding in faster than Sarah could read them. Hundreds of people were typing questions, expressions of shock, demands for explanation. Some viewers were convinced it was an elaborate hoax, others seemed to believe they were witnessing something supernatural. The chat scrolled by in a blur of confusion and disbelief. "Sarah, I can see you down there on the sidewalk," Jake's voice continued. "You're wearing that blue dress I always loved, the one you wore to my cousin's wedding last summer. You look beautiful, but I can see the worry in your eyes. I wish I could hold you and tell you everything is going to be okay." Sarah looked down at her dress, the navy blue one with small white flowers that Jake had complimented her on dozens of times. She'd put it on that morning without thinking, drawn to it by some subconscious need to feel close to him. But how could he see her from inside his apartment? How could he know what she was wearing or where she was standing? "Mom, I know you're watching this too," Jake continued. "You're at home in the kitchen, making tea and crying. Please don't cry, Mom. I'm not in pain anymore. I'm not scared. I just exist differently now, in a place where love doesn't die and memories are more real than anything you can touch." Detective Collins was coordinating with the other officers, trying to figure out how to gain access to the apartment without disturbing potential evidence. The building manager, a nervous man named Frank Torres, was fumbling with keys and apologizing repeatedly for the confusion. "I don't understand how this is possible," Torres kept saying. "I sealed that apartment myself. I have the only keys. No one has been inside." The live stream continued for another 20 minutes, with Jake addressing various family members and friends by name, sharing memories and personal details that only he could have known. He talked about his father's workshop in the garage, describing tools and projects that Robert Morrison had never mentioned to anyone else. He spoke about his grandmother's recipe for apple pie, including a secret ingredient that she'd only shared with Jake on her deathbed. But perhaps the most disturbing moment came when Jake addressed Detective Collins directly. "Detective Collins, I know you're trying to solve this mystery, and I appreciate everything you're doing for my family. But I need you to understand something important. My death wasn't an accident." Collins froze in the middle of his conversation with the building manager. The other officers turned to look at him, confusion evident on their faces. The delivery truck driver, his name is Martin Cruz, was paid to be on that highway at that exact time, Jake's voice continued. He was told to make sure I didn't make it home that night. Check his bank records from the week before my death. You'll find a deposit for $15,000 from an untraceable account. The detective immediately began making phone calls, requesting that the traffic investigation unit reopen Jake's case. The original investigation had concluded that the accident was caused by poor weather conditions and Martin Cruz's fatigue after working a double shift. No one had considered the possibility of foul play. But why? Collins asked aloud, speaking to the live stream as if Jake could hear him. Why would someone want you dead? Jake's voice took on a more serious tone. Because I discovered something I wasn't supposed to know. Because I was getting close to exposing people who hurt others for profit. Because I was naive enough to think I could fight them and win. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she processed this revelation. Jake had never mentioned being involved in anything dangerous, never suggested that he was afraid of anyone or anything beyond the normal risks of his adventurous lifestyle. But as she thought back to his behavior in the weeks before his death, she remembered subtle changes she'd attributed to work stress or relationship anxiety. He'd become more cautious about his digital security, changing passwords and enabling two-factor authentication on all his accounts. He'd started paying with cash instead of credit cards, saying he was trying to live more simply. He'd suggested they take a spontaneous trip to Canada, claiming he needed a break from the city but never explaining why. Sarah, there are things I never told you because I was trying to protect you, Jake's voice continued, as if he could hear her thoughts. But now that I'm gone, those protections don't matter anymore. In my bedroom closet, behind the box of winter clothes, there's a loose floorboard. Underneath it, you'll find documents that will explain everything. The live stream ended abruptly, leaving the apartment visible on camera but silent. The chat exploded with thousands of comments demanding more information, begging Jake to return, expressing disbelief and terror in equal measure. Detective Collins was already coordinating with Frank Torres to gain access to the apartment. Within an hour, they had the legal authorization and technical equipment needed to investigate the space safely. Sarah was allowed to accompany them, her key to the apartment serving as evidence of her legitimate access to Jake's belongings. The apartment was exactly as it appeared in the live stream, unchanged since Jake's death, filled with the lingering scent of his cologne and the weight of interrupted plans. But there was an energy in the air that hadn't been there during Sarah's previous visits, a sense of presence that made everyone who entered feel like they were being watched. The bedroom is this way, Sarah said, leading the small group of investigators to the living room toward the back of the apartment. Jake's bedroom was simply furnished but personal, decorated with photographs from his travels and adventure gear that spoke to his love of outdoor activities. The closet was exactly as Jake had described it on the live stream. Behind a box of winter coats and sweaters, one of the floorboards was indeed loose. Detective Collins carefully pried it up, revealing a hidden compartment containing a metal lockbox. Inside the box, they found documents that painted a picture of Jake's life that Sarah had never imagined. Bank statements showing deposits from sources she didn't recognize. Correspondence with people whose names she'd never heard. Photographs of individuals engaged in activities that looked suspicious and potentially illegal. But the most shocking discovery was a detailed journal, written in Jake's handwriting, that documented his involvement in something far more dangerous than his extreme sports hobbies. I've been working with federal agents for the past 8 months, the journal began, helping to investigate a human trafficking organization that operates through legitimate businesses in the city. My contact is Agent Maria Santos with the FBI. If something happens to me, she needs to know that my cover has been blown. Sarah read the journal entries with growing horror and admiration. Jake had been living a double life, using his job at a logistics company to gather intelligence about illegal activities. He documented meetings with federal agents, surveillance operations, and his growing concern that his cover identity was compromised. The entries revealed a Jake Morrison that Sarah had never known, someone willing to risk everything to help people he'd never met, someone driven by a sense of justice that went far beyond his own safety and comfort. But they also revealed why he'd been so secretive in his final weeks, why he'd been making preparations and contingency plans. They know who I am, read an entry from just days before his death. I'm being followed, my phone is being monitored, and my contacts have gone dark. I've set up systems to continue the investigation even if I'm not here to pursue it personally. I've also arranged for my family and Sarah to be protected, using technology and connections they won't understand until it's necessary.